aquela dúvida louca? Whopper ou Chicken? Agora eu tô pegando os dois, meu amor, por R$ 15. Não é, menino? Você quer sentar aqui do meu lado? Esse vai pra Anne B aqui. Já esse outro
vai pro Pedro aqui também.
Chegou King em dobro no
Absolutely disgusting. I cannot believe what the fast food industry has turned into. I thought the food was bad, and then I saw the commercials, and holy, I don't even know where that was. But with all that put aside, welcome to Punching Left. My name is AJ Wilms, joined here with Mike Lauber, and thank you for joining us. Mike, what the heck was that? It almost looked like a real life commercial, like the guy behind the drag queen was like an actual just customer trying to mind his own business.
Yeah, it probably was, but I know if nothing else is going to save me some money. There's a lot of fast food restaurants I'm not going to be going to anymore. I mean, it was Taco Bell, Burger King. I mean, I guess Chick-fil-A is still safe. I don't see them changing sides anytime soon. But
yeah, Chick-fil-A is good still, at least.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a conservative and you want to vote with your wallet, your options are rapidly becoming very limited.
Yeah, that's true. And all the more reason that we should be opening our own, or not opening our own gardens, but starting our own gardens. And maybe even opening up your own little like lemonade stands outside your homes, or your own little, what would you call that? Like a fruit stand, I guess. It's not really typically a thing you do in the suburbs, but let's start that trend, the fruit stand, suburban stand.
Yeah, actually, like I live in an area that it's kind of like a little outside the city. I'm in the suburbs, but just a few blocks down, there's actually a few farms still. They're not like giant scale, but one of them does do that a few times a year. He brings a cart down in front of his house and sells corn, has a little jar out there. You can drop your money in if you want to buy whatever from him. And, it is kind of cool, but yeah, you go to a more rural area, you see a lot more of that, the fresh egg signs and all that fun stuff.
Well, that's what we need to go back to, because the fast food stuff is not cutting it, whether it's Burger King with the drag queen stuff. I don't know why the drag queen thing is such a big, topic right now. Everything's about drag queens and transgender people all of a sudden. And it's like all the other letters of the LGBTQ plus or whatever have like kind of been put by the wayside to focus on the T's. And I guess drag queens don't even have their own letter, but the D's in the LGBT people's, community, I don't even like calling it a community, but that's like the word we use. What's with the deal on focusing on these two groups?
I've actually wondered about that, if it's just because of the shock value and they think of it away as like putting the thumb in the eye of normies and conservatives, the people that don't want to see that stuff. Because you're right, like it is a tiny percentage of the overall group anyway, but it's very it's highlighted. Everybody sees it everywhere. I mean, if you wanted to make some money in activism right now, I'm sure if you just want to pretend to be a drag queen and head out there, somebody will pay you to be in a commercial or do something else stupid.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I've been to like a lot of like fast food places in my life, and I've been to like a fair amount of Burger Kings. I've never once seen a drag queen there once, which to me says like, maybe don't gear all of your marketing towards someone who doesn't even eat at your restaurant. But maybe in Burger King, the Burger King corporate office, they're like, I've never seen a drag queen in Burger King, so we got to start making advertisings to appeal to them.
Yeah, maybe they thought it was their like demographic that they just aren't seeing in their store. This is a desperate marketing ploy. But then
but it isolates everyone else then.
Yeah. Like if I walked into a restaurant all of a sudden I saw like 20 tables full of drag queens, I think I'd just immediately turn around and walk out.
Could you imagine like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton going to like a steakhouse and then like a bunch of drag queens and stuff eating there? Like it would be ridiculous. This doesn't happen in like normal or upper class society. This happens in like the weird, obscure parts of society. And they're trying to drag that into regular society where we all live. And it's disgusting. But you would never see this where anyone who works in the corporate executive rooms are living.
No, I mean, it might happen in San Francisco, but it certainly doesn't happen anywhere else. Like you said, I can't say I've never seen somebody in drag in a restaurant, because unfortunately I have, but it's definitely not a regular occurrence. 2 times are like all I can think of, and one of those is in Florida, right by Universal Studios, where again a lot of like gay and trans and whatever people used to work.
Yeah.
The other one was like a random thing in a bad neighborhood around Dayton, but I don't know what was going on there.
It's not just Burger King though, although Burger King is terrible. It's not just the fancy restaurants that Mike goes to in Florida. It's also Pizza Hut. Which is really weird to me. I don't know what the connection is between Pizza Hut and drag queen stuff. I guess there's just as much of a connection there as with Burger King. But they're making not drag queen, drag kid book to be marketed to kindergartners.
Yeah, and again, like this is really sick. Like I remember as a kid doing a book it with Pizza Hut where like you read so many books every month, they get a little certificate and you go in there and you got a free pizza. And this is a program, I guess they still have it in some parts of the country. I'm not sure if it's still everywhere or not. But, like this is a big deal, you know, when you're in like first or second grade because you got a free pizza, you got to go to Pizza Hut. But now they're again catering towards drag kids, as they're calling them, and transgender children. They're pushing this book, and again, it's not the only restaurant, not the only business doing this. Just added to a long list, some of which we've covered, and some we've just blown over because there's so many of them now.
Yeah, well, and it's crazy to think that like this is what these mega corporations, although I don't know if Pizza Hut is really as relevant as it once was. Maybe it's not so mega anymore, but these big corporations, nonetheless, in America, are now pushing onto us. They really do want to make your child a drag queen or transgender. And I say this all the time. It's like, you know, there's that expression that is often said that, you know, the left, they think we're evil, but we just think they're wrong. And increasingly, it's getting to the point where we need to recognize, no, the left is like legitimately evil. They want to give your daughters abortions and turn your son into a drag queen or a transgender kid, which is absolutely evil. It's repugnant. It's awful. It's terrible. And we can't just say, oh, that's just wrong. Your perspective is incorrect, whatever. I don't agree with your opinion. No, that is like absolute evil and it should be destroyed.
Yeah, and like there is pushback on this, but these big corporations don't seem to care. Even when they go broke, it takes a whole. I mean, they have to lose a just massive amount of money before they'll actually change their ways. Even though we see like the polling says it's not popular with parents, there's only a small percentage of people that are behind this. It is just virtue signaling, and I can't figure out why they continue to do it because there is no financial gain for them. At least with like when Nike was getting behind like the BLM stuff and Colin Kaepernick and all that other stuff, they were making money because of the market share and who they were appealing to. But corporations like this are just losing money left and right.
Right. Well, yeah, and you can look. I mean, that's what we talked about before. Is like the market share. It's like, you know, when Nike says let's try to appeal to more black people and like support BLM because like 80% of our customers or whatever are black. That to me makes like business sense. Like that's logical, right?
Yeah.
But then when like Pizza Hut says, hey, you know who we should try to really motivate to come to our restaurants? Drag queens, not families, drag queens. It's like, why are you doing this? And I suspect it's because they have some shadowy investors who are saying, look, Pizza Hut, you're not doing so hot. You're about to go under. We know you're not looking too good. So we'll invest $10 million into your company, but you got to do something for climate change. You got to do something for the LGBT. You got to do this. You got to do that. Has to be something to raise that ESG score. And then if you do, we'll give you $1 million.
Yeah, you know, I bet you're exactly right about this. There was just a story we haven't covered about, I think it was Carl Icahn wanting to get onto the board of McDonald's and force them to begin using, you know, free range chicken, I don't know, free range beef or whatever you call it, change different things with the products they were using. And the board finally pushed him out and shot him down because they like, look, we make food that has to be affordable. That we're in, you know, thousands and thousands of locations. That's the main thing we're known for is consistent food that's affordable. So they wouldn't do it because, you know, the price of an extra value meal would all of a sudden be, instead of $8 to $10, it would be $15, and people would be getting the same thing or less. And then there was also quality issues to how long foods will keep when you get them this way, as opposed to like the way McDonald's does now, like frozen beef and all that fun stuff. But they know who their base is, and they don't want to lose that customer share or change something else where the taste of the food is different. And again, I hate McDonald's, but I'm glad they at least stood up.
Yeah, right. And, you know, it's interesting, too, because you can always have like someone come into your company and start trying to change things. And you can imagine that if it was a small company and not like one of the world's largest, but a smaller one, or a company that's just starting, or a company that's about to go under, they're much more receptive to the suggestions from other board members or large investors because they realize, well, we're going to go completely under if we don't listen to what this guy says and we get his money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's not just the restaurants, not just the fast food industry that's catering to the transvestites and the whatever else. Ben and Jerry's has started a billboard campaign to support trans youth across the country. So what I really want to know when I see this, is that a trans cow? Is that a bull that's on there? And did anyone try to milk it to make ice cream?
Who knows, honestly? And it's weird to see that so many like fast food restaurants or like I guess ice cream companies or whatever are moving into this super progressive like mindset where everything has to be like trans rights. Again, it's always about like trans rights and stuff. We're not like handpicking only transgender stories. This is like, oh, it's Pride Month. Let's see what craziness all these companies are posting. It's just flooded with specifically transgender stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like I don't get why all these companies are making the bet. Now, I'm not surprised that Ben and Jerry's is, because again, they've been very active. They're extremely liberal. Their policies don't make sense. It is just about virtue signaling and getting, retweets on Twitter. I don't think there's any real policy behind this. They just know that it'll help them with advertising, and then somebody will be like, "Oh, I'll pick up a pint of Ben and Jerry's tonight."
That's interesting. The only connection I have with Ben and Jerry's, I've never eaten there, but I think I worked with a girl, and she was the daughter-in-law of the owners of Ben and Jerry, or like maybe they're just like regional owners or something. But she was like super, super, super liberal, and like in the workplace, there was a transgender dude, and he would use like the girls' bathrooms, and I'm like, I know you're liberal, but like, let's cut the crap. That's a little weird, don't you think? And she got all defensive, and she's like, no, no, what do you mean? Like, I could get, assaulted by a girl just as easily as a guy, and I'm like, okay, whatever you say, you do you. But to
Yeah.
me, that seemed kind of odd how liberal she was, but it kind of makes sense that maybe the Ben and Jerry people, you think they're bad forward and with their publicity and such and their advertising. Wait till you see what the family does behind the scenes. It's quite crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I know they've been like big Bernie supporters and all that for a long time. So again, like I'm not surprised by this, but it's when it starts dipping into our public spaces too, our libraries and everything else. The library in New York is hosting a drag camp for kids 11 and up to adopt a drag persona and perform at a pride show.
I'm speechless, and this is happening as well in Dallas. There's a drag show for children, and it's just completely gross how again they're using the drag queen thing, they're using the transgender thing. As Mike said, it's like one of the most shocking and gross parts of the LGBT, and it all is gross, but this is like the most in your face kind of gross, and they're pushing that onto kids. And maybe there's another aspect to it where like drag queens are like whimsical enough that it appeals to kids. Like they have like the weird hats and like all the makeup and they look like clowns or whatever. And, kids love clowns, although I don't even know how true that is. But you
Yeah.
get the point, right? It's almost like they're using the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the over exaggerated nature of drag queens to appeal
Yeah.
to little kids because it's big, it's exciting, it's larger than life.
Yeah, like I always say that, it's like a human cartoon character back before we
Yeah.
were seeing it all the time. Like to me, it was always just a joke when I saw these little clips from different shows or whatever. I never thought anybody would like take it seriously and start marketing. It was just a lunatic on display out in public.
Yeah.
But now it is getting pushed everywhere and it's into marketing. And as we've seen, we talked about before, with over 20% of youth now identify as some part of the LGBTQ spectrum.
Wow.
And this is going to have drastic consequences going forward, 5 to 10 years from now.
Well, yeah, especially when you look at like birth rates and you see that, it's already bad enough that American people have such a low birth rate in this country. And then you add to that abortion and you add to that birth control and you add to that, encouraging women to not get married and just enter the workforce and just work a 9 to 5 for their entire lives or not have kids. And then you look at the fact that they're trying to turn all of these kids gay. And it's not a conspiracy theory anymore. If you said this 10 years ago, people would think you're crazy, but they are literally taking kids and they are putting them into drag queen clubs and having them dance around like drag queens. They are literally taking transgender people and gay people and putting them into schools to teach your kid about why it's so great to be gay and why it's totally acceptable, regardless of your personal values or your religious values or your family values. And that is like, to me, picture perfect evidence that they are trying to make your child transgender, gay, or involved in the LGBTQ community in general. And they won't deny this. They'll say, yes, of course we want our community to grow. Of course we want as many people in the LGBT as possible. And to say this in a negative context will get you banned from YouTube. But to say this as a member of the LGBT, you'll be promoted and your videos will be shared even more on YouTube, just like with all these drag queen events that are published on YouTube.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, like with that story we covered out of Colorado a few episodes back with, I think her name was Erin Lee that broke the story. She was a mother at the school. A lot of times they're doing this under the guise of something else. her daughter, who was 11, 12 years old, somewhere like that, something like that. Um, they offered an after school art club for her to go to. She got to it and found out it was an LGBTQ art club where they didn't do any art. Instead, they were just kind of pushing this agenda. She got it, gave her a goodie bag with all these little trans flags and other things, and told her specifically, like, don't talk to your parents about this, that if you have questions, you call me. And then this drag queen lady that was there gave her, contact information. But essentially, it is just recruiting and grooming kids into their movement, and they'll do it behind your back. They'll do it, whatever it takes to induct more children into this ideology.
Well, yeah, it's very disturbing. And speaking of inducting people in, what's this next story we have here? Is this a continuation of another? This is even.
Yeah,
I don't even know. All these stack up, and I don't know which is worse than the other. Why don't you explain this story?
yeah. So this is in Loudoun County, Virginia, which is kind of where all the school board stuff started originally, with the young woman that was raped in the bathroom by the transgender male, and then they tried to cover it up. Right. The librarian at the same school district is out there stating, well, first she was defending a book in their library that promotes sex work. Virginia school librarian describes students as sex workers. And yeah, then in an interview defending why this book was there, she said, well, some of them do sex work now. And again, we're talking a grade school, high school librarian.
What?
And this is, again, what's being taught to these children. So, of course, the story...
Dude, it blows my mind.
Yeah, that this is acceptable. And
yeah, like, I can't believe this is happening in this country, that we have, like, public officials, like public administrators who are in our schools today, who are saying sex work is not bad work. And by the way, sex work is not even like a legit thing. You're just a prostitute if you're a sex worker, right? And it's something that should carry with it a negative connotation. I mean, my mind just is completely melted by the fact that people can get away with saying this. And then when she's pressed, like you said, Mike, she's like, well, maybe some of the students are already sex workers. Who knows? It's like, would you want your kid going to the school? I sure wouldn't.
Yeah, and again, like, this is Loudoun County, Virginia. Like, this is where a lot of this stuff started, the push back against CRT. You would think at some point they would learn a lesson if they are going to still do this stuff, at least try to do it in the shadows instead of out where everybody sees it. I'm right. Glad they are dumb enough not to try to cover it up. That way they keep getting caught, and then something can be done to end this. But nobody learns. And again, it's not like this is one school district somewhere. We keep all these stories that we have are from different states, different areas, different companies. It's a lot more widespread than people think it is. So which makes me wonder, like, is this really something that just sprung up all of a sudden, or is this something that's been going into place over the last 5 to 10 years, and it's just now that all of it's coming out and being exposed?
Well, I do think that the slippery slope meme is very real. And, to go back on something that you said earlier, I do think that, there are a lot of shadowy things happening behind the scenes that we don't know about. And it's just the few dumb teachers who get caught, like this woman who came out and said, oh, grade school kids are like sex workers. Like, you have to be pretty dumb to say that, which is probably why they're coming out and they're saying this in the public, right? But how many teachers are more calculated and don't come out and say these things, or they're more subtle? How many teachers are, or maybe not even teachers, but like school counselors work and are telling kids, no, be gay, don't tell your parents, it's okay. And they have I think the legal protection of like a psychologist and child confidentiality. I don't know how that works if you're underage, but I know like that would cause some issues too. And certainly even on a non-legal level, they are like ethically obligated to keep whatever they talk about between them. So how many teachers, counselors, principals, school administrators are working behind the scenes doing shadowy stuff like this? How many people are writing textbooks that are going to be used in all the different schools? How many people are setting curriculums in the schools that are going to be taught? These are the people that we need to be most concerned about.
Yeah, exactly. And this woman she alleged many of the students in the school are sex workers now. So shouldn't this at the very least been reported to the authorities? If we're talking about minors, that would be exploitation or statutory rape or something's going on, or this should have been reported to authorities and investigated. And if she is like just letting this pass or maybe even encouraging it, then she needs to be thrown in jail. She definitely shouldn't be working around students anymore. So I was talking with somebody else a few days ago about not this story directly, but something else that was going on in another school. Actually, there's another story, I think it was in Michigan, similar thing going on. But anyway, when our side does take power again, like we can't forget about these things and not
Yeah.
do anything. We need to go after all these teachers and administrators and everybody else and prosecute them. We need to make sure they never work with children again, even if we can't put them in jail. They all need to be labeled sex offenders and cast out of our society, or this will continue to happen.
Oh, absolutely. And you're right that this has been happening for a very long time. And I think it goes back much further than even 5 or 10 years. I think this goes all the way back to like 80 years ago when you really start to see, starting with the Soviets, like the implementation of all of these, for lack of a better term, like agents or whatever of destruction who came in here and realized, well, we're not going to beat America in a war of like, bullet to bullet. And why would we when that uses so much manpower and resources and kills so many of our people? Let's just go into their country and over the course of decades, put ourselves into all of their important institutions, media, academia, within education, within Hollywood, and then we'll start producing from these institutions all this degenerate filth. And that's what we've seen, a fair bit of consistency prior to World War II throughout American history, and then rapidly, all of a sudden, a big shift, especially with mass media, where we just have like the complete decline of America, after the World War II, Vietnam era in America. So it's upsetting to see, but this has been going on for a very long time, and we're just seeing it accelerate faster and faster as we lose more and more political power in this country.
Yeah, it's much easier to subvert your enemy and hollow them out from the inside than it is to fight them on the battlefield. So I don't blame our enemies for using this strategy, but it's our fault for not doing something earlier to put a stop to this, force them out of our classrooms, to regain control of our media and Hollywood and everything else. I mean, this again, it has been an ongoing problem for, like you said, probably 70 to 80 years of them hollowing out our institutions.
And all of our enemies publicly state this. Like when it was the USSR, they came out and they were like, yeah, we're not going to go toe to toe with America. We can just put spies in there or whatever. Maybe it wasn't like a public government address, but that was like not uncommon knowledge. And today, like China has put out the same thing, like domestic addresses saying like, oh, America's just going to collapse on its own. Like we don't need to go to war with them. We're just going to wait for them to collapse and we'll be the #1 superpower and we'll control the world. Like there's no like Chinese invasion that's being planned to take over America, because anyone with eyes can just look at America and see how we're declining and we're about to collapse and something very bad is about to happen domestically. All China has to do as #2 is wait for #1 to like fall apart, and then they're made #1. They didn't have to do a single thing.
Exactly. It takes a lot less effort and a lot less money. And also, we've seen China both in our schools and colleges, or I know there have been a number of arrests recently in research departments with different companies, putting their people within our positions of control. And it's not just China. Saudi Arabia is funding all these different schools and mosques here. Same thing. It's getting a grip on different elements within our society that they can then switch on and activate when they want to either cause problems or to just slowly subvert the culture and take over different aspects of it.
Well, and that should be something of like note for a lot of like people who, especially like limited government types and libertarians and such, that like all these other countries are like, hey, let's use our entire nation's like resources to go and like take over Hollywood, to take over media, to take over education in America, because they realize when they do this, they'll control America. Meanwhile, in our own country, we stop ourselves from controlling our own institutions. Like if you were to say, hey, Donald Trump should run Hollywood, Donald Trump should like fire every terrible person in Hollywood, from Harvey Weinstein to all the rest of them, and he should just run Hollywood and only produce mega and Christian films. Everyone would be like, whoa, you can't do that. You can't do that. But then meanwhile, we have like people from China literally flying in, going into Hollywood, having China produce movies, and then getting it distributed to the American people. And it's like, I don't know, man, which do you think is less bad?
Yeah, honestly, I think they're both not really, they're both bad. But the problem is, at this point, we do need a way to fight back, because even when companies do try to do something that's positive, like the Daily Wire, like this last film, What is a Woman? No, like typical Hollywood, like Rotten Tomatoes or other companies that review film critics. None of them will touch it. It has overwhelmingly positive reviews from people that watched the movie, but no other place will touch it, or they won't allow it in the theaters. And they've had the same thing with other films that they've done, like this other one they've coming out in a month or so that's just a story, the Terror on the Prairie. They had to push back the release date of it because theaters wouldn't carry it. And again, like that's not even one where it's a documentary or something that could be considered offensive. It's just a movie.
Well, we on the right like to not use the government to win, but on the left they love using government to win, and they use it every day, and that's what they're doing right now with
Yeah.
no free lunches if you don't comply with the LGBT agenda. Mike, what is this all about?
Yeah, so this is really sick, and this story just came out within the last few days. But the Biden administration, the Biden regime, is forcing schools under Title IX that receive funding for their school lunch program, which used to just be for families that really couldn't afford it, make sure the kids are fed. But now, if they want to continue to participate in this program, they have to allow kids to go into cross-gendered bathrooms. So, your little boy, if he decides to want to identify as a little girl, can go to the women's room. And again, they're using this as a way to force schools to comply, because unfortunately, like the way our society works, is a lot of these school districts, especially in rural areas or in bad areas of different cities, they rely on this because a lot of the parents don't have money supposedly to take care of their kids, so they become dependent on the millions of dollars that come in every day to make sure everybody's fed. So,
Right. And this seems like one of the things that you probably shouldn't mess with. Like it's a necessity. It's like,
yeah.
hey, these kids are hungry. They need food. Well, let's not let them eat unless they do what we want politically or whatever. It seems like a pretty rash decision. And I have no idea who's greenlighting all of these decisions within the Biden administration, from the disinformation like committee or whatever they had, and choosing that lunatic to run it who sings like Mary Poppins TikTok songs online,
Yes.
to doing like the starving out kids until they use the opposite gendered bathrooms or whatever. It's like, who on earth thinks these are like politically smart ideas to do?
Yeah, and at some point I kind of feel like some of the states should start fighting back, like start telling
Yeah.
all their residents to withhold paying federal taxes until things are resolved here, because
Yeah,
the,
well,
the
that would
only
be
way,
good.
yeah, the only way you're going to win one of these things is to fight back the same way they are, hold them accountable. I mean, there really are not laws that allow the federal government to do these kind of things anyway. We've just let them get away with so many things for so long. I mean, that's where I think the majority of our problems stem from. At the core is we've become so reliant on the federal government to do things that are really assigned to the states, and then we end up with these big universal programs. And when the wrong person gets behind control of that, we end up with situations like this. Luckily, like Carrie Lake, who's running for governor in Arizona, and hopefully she wins. I know she's ahead in polling. She pointed this out. And again, I don't know who could possibly be behind this. Like, what percentage of the population thinks it's a good idea to withhold funding for the school lunch program unless the school will allow kids to go to cross-gendered bathrooms?
Yeah, it's a weird hill to die on, but I do think that this is something that this is something that I could have expected coming, because if you look at American history today, the hot button issue everyone's talking about is the transgender stuff and LGBT rights. It's like that and abortion, right? And unfortunately, this is like the big issue of the day, and it's very disgusting and gross. But 50 years ago, there was something that we would consider not as controversial today, but back then was very controversial, which was segregation in schools. And if you recall, it took literally like the president sending the National Guard or the 82nd Airborne in to like at gunpoint force schools to integrate, and that was to force racial integration. Today we don't have racial problems like we did. Well, we still have some racial issues, but the issue of segregation is not really a question that we're concerned of anymore. What we are concerned of is gender segregation, right? Boys in boys bathrooms, girls in girls bathrooms. And you can see, like, if the government at one point ended racial segregation with guns pointed at people's heads, and now they're saying, well, gender segregation is still segregation. It's still based on immutable characteristics. It's the same thing, just a different category. You can reasonably see the government saying, hey, look, there's even like more support for transgenderism in schools than, segregation in schools in the South back in the 50s. So if we put you at gunpoint for that, we're definitely going to be doing it here. And we're definitely going to be withholding food from your kid unless you comply.
Yeah, what's interesting is I wonder at this stage of the game, if they did start really enforcing this in the coming school year, would we see parents similar to what we're seeing in Texas after the school shooting, where you have them outside of the school patrolling with guns now? In a few cities, would we see parents go into the schools and make sure that the boys are going to the boys' room and the girls are going to the girls' room? Would they start enforcing it the opposite way and force the feds out?
Well, yeah, I honestly don't know because, obviously in like grade schools or whatever, it's probably not as big of a concern, although it still shouldn't be happening. But especially in like high schools or, even I guess even in some middle schools, there can be some really disgusting things that happen and a lot of like different sexual assaults that can occur, especially like I said, in high schools. And that's when you don't want like the creepy, weird, mentally ill guy going into the girls' bathroom or going into the girls' changing room in the schools. And for that, I mean, I could see a rational father saying, I am literally just going to stand outside the girls' bathroom or whatever and make sure no guys walk in. I don't think that would be a crazy dad thing to do. And is it going to get to that point, Mike? That's a good question.
It probably is. And actually, it isn't just the bathrooms in this bill. I probably should have been clear about this earlier. It is the changing rooms. The way it's written in this piece of or in this proposal is it calls it private areas, which I feel like is a really bad way to put it. But it is bathrooms, changing rooms, or any other part of the school that would be gender segregated for obvious reasons.
Yeah, it blows my mind. And, we've gone through again, the reason why I expect this, and people may not think this is like a fair equivalency to draw or anything, but the reality is the arguments are identical, that there was a time in America when we said race is not a social construct, it's real, and there's differences between the races, so they should be treated differently. And then the kind of academics came in and said, no, it's just a social construct, race isn't real, there's no biological basis, it's all just a social construct. And then we said, oh, okay, well, if it's a social construct, we shouldn't be treating people differently, because you're just saying it's like a figment of our imagination. It's not real. Why would we treat people differently about something that's not real? Now, all of the same arguments, like word for word, are being used for gender, where conservatives today say, hey, there's differences biologically between men and women, and therefore they should be treated differently. And the academics come in again and they say, no, it's a social construct. Gender is just a social construct. It's not real. That's why you can't treat men and women differently. And again, like you look back and it's like, separate does not mean equal. Separate but equal cannot be a thing. Well, what about boys and girls being in different locker rooms that are equal? Can they be separate but equal? We already have precedents in American law that says, that is not a thing. So this is why I've been saying this for like years now. I've been seeing what's happened in the past and being like, well, if the arguments are the same and the parallels can be drawn, we're going to get the same outcome, except this time it's probably not going to be for the betterment of our country. It's going to be for the detriment of it.
Yeah, well, I think there's a huge difference between separating people by race and discriminating that way, and separating with biological differences, by gender. Like there's a reason for one and not the other, or a valid reason for one, not the other. The argument on the other side at this point is just pure lunacy. There are obvious biological differences between men and women. That's like whether it's sports or anything else. But I mean, the one good part of this is I do feel like in mass, like the normies are waking up to this. They don't want their daughters competing against men in swimming events or track and field or whatever else. And there was just another story with some type of bicycle event where a transgender man just beat all the women out at that yesterday. So
yeah, and I mean, it's further proof of the biological differences, and it's absurd that in academia and that's being seeped into media as well, and translated to the rest of us, that gender is a social construct. You can clearly look at like the DNA of someone scientifically and see there are literally genetic differences between men and women, and that does have an outcome when it comes to things like you said, like sports or like in many other things. And because of that, that is what justifies the difference in treatment. And there's absolutely nothing wrong. And again, you can treat like two different groups the same, and that's not a bad thing. You can say men and women both get their own bathrooms. They'll be the same, and you'll just be in your own bathrooms.
Yeah, exactly. I think anything else is just arguing semantics there. If they're not exactly 100% copies of each room. But as long as you're providing, roughly equivalent facilities for both people, because really the keeping men out of women's sports is to protect women. It's not to help men. I mean, you don't see any women competing in the men's league and just beating the crap out of everybody.
Right.
Not in the same way, especially when you talk like combat sports and things like that, where there's clear differences. But again, I guess we're just going to continue to pretend until there's a big enough lawsuit or some poor woman gets killed. And, until then, I think they're just going to keep pushing this propaganda until there's major pushback from the center. Yeah,
unfortunately, that seems to be the case. And what's this up here? Left-wing propaganda. How much more of how much more LGBTQ and left-wing propaganda do we have to get in this country?
Well, this one's not just the LGBTQ and CRT and everything else. Has to do with NewsGuard that goes through and certifies stories, and the other the fact checkers on the internet. NewsGuard goes in and they certify whether a news source is legit or not. And they definitely come down on more of a heavy hand with conservative sites than they do with liberal ones. Though, in their defense, they have declared, like Huffington Post, I think, and a few other major left-wing news sites to be fake news or propaganda or other things. So they do occasionally do their job. But they are now going to partner with a teachers union to help certification with, I believe it's like textbooks, news articles, and the material for class, calling things misinformation. But again, just like we saw in the last election cycle, this is going to be done for political advantage. And that's why, again, we want to call attention to this now, get this out there as soon as possible. So when it starts happening, we're organized and ready to push back.
Yeah, and this is very concerning, the big push for like misinformation and everything, because we know that misinformation is just categorized basically as anything the left doesn't like, which is very dangerous because we're obviously in this seeking truth. And when you have when you have an opponent who's not in this for seeking truth, but just seeking their own political, expediency or whatever, they're going to lie, and then they're going to call you the one who's the real liar. And that's the issue here, is that we have all these left-wing pundits, we have all these left-wing organizations and media companies who are constantly pushing lies, saying, no, this is the truth. Then they look at the right and us, and we're saying the truth plainly to people, and everyone knows it's true. But then the public gets gaslit by these same people who are telling lies, saying, no, the right wingers are the real liars. Don't listen to them.
Yeah, and as we've seen over and over again with these little fact-checking or NewsGuard type organizations being very one-sided. I mean, there was an example during the last election cycle with Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders where they literally quoted the same article, same headline, word for word, and then had nearly the same reaction to it, nearly the same response. But what Donald Trump said about it, they've labeled as mostly false, and what Bernie Sanders said about it, they labeled as mostly true. And again,
Right.
we're talking like near identical quotes, but we see this happen over and over and over again. It's not intended to be a fair source. It's made to just call your opponent a liar over and over again. A lot of times they'll point to something semantic, or they will add something to the quote, an assumption that they make, and then declare something false.
Well, yeah, and it's similar to like when I think it was Snoops or whatever, they or Snopes,
Yeah,
Snopes. They wanted to, they got a request to review a fact check on like voter fraud, right? And there was these ballots that were allegedly thrown into a dumpster. Allegedly, because we're on YouTube. We don't know for sure if that happened, and we totally believe there was no election fraud, but there was allegedly some ballots thrown in a dumpster. So Snoops like goes and investigates this, and they're like, oh, mostly false. There was no voter fraud because 11, or it was something like 10 out of 11 of the ballots were for Trump, but one of them there was like no names filled out. So that proves it wasn't just about Trump. And then the FBI investigated, and when they asked the person who they thought threw it out why it was in the garbage can, they were like, oh, we don't know. So that proves that it wasn't on purpose and it was an accident.
Well, I'm surprised they didn't say false. This was thrown into a recycling bin, not a garbage can, and just leave it there.
They literally do things like that. That's the crazy part, right? Where it's like, this wasn't targeted at Trump because only like 11 out of 12 or whatever were for Trump, and the other one was like with no one. And then, oh, well, they said it was an accident, so it must have been.
Yeah, exactly. Like they'll take somebody at their word if it benefits the left, and if it benefits the right, they won't believe a word they say, and then they'll try to dig into their character and find reasons to not believe it, even if the person really is apolitical, as we've seen in other stories.
Right. Well, and it just goes to show how, people really do just read the headlines, because there's no way that because I remember seeing that article, that headline, and I'm like, what? False? Like, is this actually not true? And I read through it and I'm like, holy, if anyone read this, they would think your website's totally uncredible and total BS. But the thing is they can take that hit because probably only 1 in 100 people actually go and look on the website. And the people who are critical thinkers enough, now I don't sound like a critical thinker, people who critically think more than others who do go on the website probably aren't on the left in the first place, right? So the only people who they're trying to appeal to are the ones who just read the headlines and move on, and then just get swayed to the left because that's where like the normie culture is.
Yeah, and another trick that all media likes to pull at this point is, again, making this bombastic headline that makes some point, and then have the truth 15 paragraphs in the article. And Mike Lindell's talked about this a lot with different agencies, where they'll write an article about him or about some piece of a court case of his, and they'll have all this stuff at the top that's less than truthful, or cast in a way that's less than truthful, but not quite enough to where you could sue for libel or something.
Right.
So they spend the first 3/4 of the article slandering him, and then at the end they'll put the truth. So you also can't go back and say, well, we didn't lie, it was in there, it was included. And that's the game they play, because again, they know 9 out of 10 people are never going to read through an 11 paragraph article like that. They're going to look at the headline, maybe scan through the first couple of paragraphs, and that's where they're going to stop, and that's where they're going to get their information. But if they actually read through to the end, they'd be like, wait a minute, this headline doesn't match what the outcome of this article was.
Yeah, and it's upsetting to think that, in America, we really don't have a very strong counterforce to a lot of the media, because it's so what's the word I'm looking for? They have a stronghold on media right now, where all these different news organizations have the money to just pay authors to just write nonsense for 20 paragraphs just so they can hide in the truth at the bottom so that they can put the headline out or whatever. And it's sad to see that in a more conservative nation relative to the rest of Europe, we still have a liberal stronghold. And in a traditionally Christian country, we're still not doing enough to protect our Christian values. We're not even doing as much as some Muslim countries at keeping Christian values. Over in Kuwait, they got mad at a U.S. diplomat for sending out a tweet that was celebrating Pride Month.
Yeah, they called him in to meet with somebody within their diplomatic relations office, handed him a memo, and
the executioner or something.
Yeah, I hope so, just to scare the life out of this guy. Handed him a memo, and I'm sure he got a stern talking to. But either way, they're not afraid to push back and be like, no, we don't want this sick stuff in our country. You shouldn't be promoting it. They even pointed out that this was, I guess, against diplomatic rules that most countries adhere to, that pushing this kind of propaganda out on your media and to their people would be considered not necessarily illegal, but improper.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's almost not how do I say this? Not an act of war, but an act of soft power. You know what I mean? Where it's look, we're not going to go to war with you. We're not threatening to blow you up, but we are kind of trying to get all your kids to be gay and have abortions, right? And it's almost which is worse? A military saying, hey, get your best guys, we'll get ours, and we'll duke it out in a battlefield, or hey, we're going to go into your homes via TVs or social media, and we're going to make your son, dress up like a woman and never have kids. And we're going to force your daughter or coerce her into getting an abortion or whatever. I almost feel like the second is worse. And states that have a bit of common sense to them, probably like Kuwait or just about any country other than America at this point, they look and they think, yeah, we don't really want America's demonic influence coming into our country. And this is why I said it's so upsetting that America used to be a Christian nation where these things wouldn't happen, where we would be equally as outraged about things like this. But now our government has been totally taken over by Satanists, that these things are being pushed constantly. And even Islamic countries who we typically see as bad. And I'm not a fan of Islam, believe me. But even they're hey, guys, you guys got to pump the brakes. That's not very Christ-like to be acting like that. It's not very moral to be acting the way you guys are.
Yeah, they don't want us subverting their culture. And I guess what really set this off wasn't even the initial tweet. It was the fact that shortly after that, they retweeted this in Arabic and then sent it out, where they know a lot of people in Kuwait are going to follow the U.S. Account there. Yeah, so that's what sent them through the roof.
You see what I mean? It's not active war. It's malicious. That's the word I was looking for. I'm word salad guy today because I can't think of any words to use. Maybe it's the opposite. I can't even think of a word to use for not knowing what words to use. But yeah, it's malicious intent. That's what the U.S. was doing when they were tweeting this out in Arabic and stuff. It's what are you guys trying to do? And I heard too that Israel also launched some pornography campaign. I believe it was in Kuwait or maybe the United Arab Emirates. And this was last year. And that got lots of public outrage. And it's these foreign countries, I can understand why these nations are getting annoyed, because you have these foreign Western nations who are coming in and trying to implement degeneracy, whether it's through pornography or the LGBT stuff, and they want to be left alone. And again, I'm not big fans of these countries. I think they're pretty bad. And I like all these Western countries more despite all of our flaws. But that doesn't mean that we're doing everything perfect. We really shouldn't be trying to mess with them when it comes to the LGBT stuff. We need to be focused on getting rid of that in our own country, certainly, before we start trying to indoctrinate other nations into our beliefs.
Yeah, like if this was a message about like, hey, stop throwing your gays off the tops of buildings, I could at least kind of understand that. Don't execute people for being gay, but just pushing like pure propaganda in a country that doesn't want it is not good at a diplomatic level or anything else.
Right.
And it is something we continue to do. And we know that there's been blowback for trying to control countries previously, whether it's installing puppet governments through South America,
Right.
or all the garbage that went on in Africa, other countries in Europe. We always end up paying for this stuff in the long run. Do we really want to inspire their next generation of terrorists?
Yeah, that's kind of funny too. It's like, we have been in Central America and South America and Africa and Asia and the Middle East. And we've been all over America with setting up puppet regimes and influencing governments. And there comes a point where we need to probably just say, hey, enough is enough. We got our own problems to deal with. And like, I honestly do not care about some socialist dictator in like, Central America as much as I care about my own family in America. That needs to be the top priority before anything else.
Yeah, exactly. We can't even take care of our own people right now. And, here's another example of it and what's happening at the border right now. Texas authorities did not warn the community that there was evidence an escaped prisoner was in the area that led to the murder of a grandfather and 4 of his grandsons.
Whoa.
Yes. So they were staying at a small cabin somewhere near the border. This guy was an escaped convict, illegal alien. He was in for murder.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think multiple murders. Actually, I forgot to include that. But they didn't warn people that he was in the area, and he'd actually been spotted just 2,000 feet from where this cabin was. And again, like neighbors said, like this guy would never have gone out there with his grandkids over the weekend if they knew the guy was in the area.
Yeah. Who would? I mean, that's insane. And it just goes to show how much of an issue that immigration really is. And we have these people flooding into our countries in like quite literally the hundreds of thousands per month. And this has got much worse with the Biden administration. It was still very bad during the Trump administration because Trump had his hands tied, of course. And the people coming in, as Trump said, they're not sending their best when they come here, Mexico and other nations. It's usually the worst of their society who's leaving. If you're rich and you're doing well in Mexico, you probably don't want to become an illegal immigrant and get into the US. Even if you're a middle class person and you want to immigrate, there's legal ways to do so. But the illegal ones in particular, probably more likely than any group to be committing crimes like this multiple homicide convict who escapes from prison. And I'd like to know how he escaped from prison as well. That's interesting to me. And then goes and murders more Americans.
Yeah, and they were a little light on details. He escaped from a prison bus, but I couldn't find good details on what happened there. Who knows? But yeah, he was serving 2 consecutive life sentences already for murder. He killed their family, took an AR-15 the guy had, ended up getting in a shootout with the police after getting forced off the road. And then he was luckily killed in the gunfire, so we don't have to deal with reprocessing him. It'll save us money from eventually sending him back to Mexico.
Yeah, well, we should have just killed him in the first place. Like, I don't know why if someone is getting like 2 life sentences, literally just kill them. If they're like a foreign person who came into our country and killed our people, they are a foreign invader. They are worse than like the Chinese government or the Russian government because this is an invader who actually came to America with a gun and started killing our people. This is someone who should be executed and be just totally taken care of. Maybe that's a hot take, but that's what I think. Why waste all of our resources on taking care of this guy for the rest of his life, where he's now going to live in prison with better living conditions than he would have in the slum that he came from? So luckily he did die in the shootout, but this should have happened before he killed an entire family again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is his first rodeo, but our government's encouraging more of this. We're not doing anything to discourage it. If we were treating illegal aliens that were here that commit some other crime harsher than we treat our own people, that might be at least some level of disincentive for people to come in here. But instead,
right,
you come up here, we're literally putting people onto welfare rolls. I just saw a story yesterday where apparently the Biden regime is just ignoring Title 42 since judges have told them they've had to leave it in place and continue to enforce it. So as people come over the border now, they're just busing them out into the heartland of the country and then, moving their court dates back, and they just let them disappear into the shadows.
Right.
So when the word gets out that that's happening, I bet we are going to see this number of people at the border just double overnight, like they've been saying for a while. It'll go from 18,000 a day to 40,000 a day. Because we already know there's people staged throughout Mexico that are waiting to come up or waiting to complete their journey because they wanted to see what happened with this. Under Title 42, anybody that wasn't from Mexico or from most South American nations, they were just immediately turned around because there was obviously some other country that they could have stopped to and asked for asylum, in first. So, if you
Well,
don't enforce the
and the
laws,
thing is it's not just like illegal. Like when we hear illegal immigrants, we think of the people who like, run across the border, swim across the Rio Grande or whatever, Grand, and then they like get into the country and they start committing crime or whatever, or taking jobs. There's, those are what are counted as illegal immigrants. But there's almost like another category, I'm just thinking out loud here, which we could call like proto illegals, which are people who come here who have absolutely no right to be here. They have no reason to be here. They're not coming to, open a business. They're not coming with like an investment visa. They're not coming to fill a job that they were scouted for. They come here and they're like, oh, I'm a refugee. I want to seek asylum. And they go through a legitimate port of entry. They get allowed into the nation and they get given like a court date or whatever. And then they can just live in the U.S. and work in the U.S. in many cases while their visa is processing. And then if it gets denied, they can appeal it and still live in the U.S. and work. And then by the time their appeal gets denied years and years later, they can just apply for a different, visa or a different type of status. And then the same process goes on. And you can literally live here for like, decades at a time, depending on what visa you apply for and how long the appeal process works, and like legally live in the US and legally work in the US and legally, do all the things that visa holders can do. So it's not only that we have people who like come here illegally by like not going through a port of entry. We also have people coming here like illegally through like a loophole in our system that allows people to just live here and work here while processing visas. And then while they wait for appeals, if USCIS rejects their visa in the first place.
Yeah, and again, that's insane. Just like allowing anybody that's here legally or illegally that's an immigrant onto our welfare rolls. That's absolutely nuts, but we do it. I mean, I've seen some estimates that somewhere between like 40 and 60% of people that are coming here illegally through Mexico right now are then end up on our welfare rolls. And this is insanely expensive, both for the state that hosts them and for all this taxpayers that are paying into the federal government would subsidize all these welfare programs. Like we're spending an astronomical amount of our tax dollars, your money, on funding these people and funding their lifestyle. And you have a huge percentage of them that is why they came here, because they know that we'll be their piggy bank.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is like, why is it that like welfare and food stamps and these other benefits are eligible for people who are resident aliens or green card holders? Why is it not just for U.S. citizens? At least with like the citizenship requirement, you have to be able to like speak English and like pass a basic like 9th grade test or whatever on U.S. history. And I mean, I'm talking like who was the first president? Yeah. How many branches of government are there? Like super basic stuff. And, there is at least some requirement, and a lot of green card holders, they don't want to, do the work to get citizenship. That would cut off a lot of the most lazy people who literally just come here, collect their green card, and then start getting their welfare check next week. And by the way, we don't have any age limit on immigration too. So I've seen people who immigrate here in their 80s, in their 90s, and they start cashing in Social Security immediately. You can come here in your 60s and just like immediately go on Social Security, never work a day in your life, get Medicare, Social Security, welfare, food stamps. For some reason, this is the system that we have set up in America.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely disgraceful. It's insane that this is what we do and nobody will fix it, even though they're aware of these problems. I don't understand why like the welfare benefits or any of that kind of stuff is open to anybody outside of the country that is not a U.S. citizen, and why this isn't just a simple hole in the dam that we couldn't plug today. Like who in Congress would vote against that?
Why don't we just make welfare like the military or something? Maybe that sounds crazy, but why don't we be like, hey, you need money? You join the military. We'll find a job for you. We don't care if you like, we'll make sure we have standards for like the important jobs, but like you'll be the janitor for like the barracks or whatever. Hey, you don't like it, get a real job then, right? You want a paycheck, you're going to work for it, and you're going to serve the country in some way.
I used to work with a guy that had what I thought was like a brilliant idea with people that were abusing unemployment. He said, okay, well, why don't we switch the system to this? So your first month, there's no pressure. It works just like unemployment now. You send in a thing on a weekly basis. They send you a check as you're looking for a job. If you don't have a new job within a month, then you're required to go in and you work for the city for minimum wage. Basically, it might be like pushing a broom, sweeping the streets, or grabbing garbage, just the jobs that nobody wants to do, and you pay it just at minimum wage. Like that's what our unemployment should be. That after the first month, you're required to go in. Maybe you only work, say, and the rest of the time you have to be out there in a provable way trying to get yourself another job.
Right.
People can stay on it
Well,
for
yeah.
as long as they
I mean,
want.
if we're paying them out the money anyways, we may as well make someone work for it, you know, because some people will be like, oh, that's like Keynesian economics, like using the government to make jobs. No, no, no. We're giving the money away for free. Like, let's get something out of the money. That's the point.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, if you got to pay, say, $15 an hour or whatever minimum wage is, I don't know, minimum wage, I think federally is still $7.25 or $7.50.
Yeah.
But yeah, you might as well require them to work 20 hours a week and then have a provable something to prove that they've applied for these jobs. Let them stay on it as long as they want, because they're going to be doing jobs nobody wants to do anyway, sweeping streets, digging ditches, that kind of stuff. So ultimately we're coming out ahead because it would be cost us more to pay somebody else to do it, but also disincentivizes staying on that forever. Nobody likes digging ditches in the wintertime. It's not in Ohio.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So,
well, you got my vote, Mike.
Yeah, perfect. Well, when I run for office, I'll let everybody know.
And in other news, we also have the Seattle police that stopped investigating sexual assaults. Mike, what is this?
Yeah, so they're saying due to not being fully staffed, they're no longer investigating adult sexual assault or rape cases. And this is ongoing for a while. A memo just leaked about it, but this started at the very end of March or beginning of April. They just don't have money to fund that particular department.
Well, you know, I'm always stuck when it comes to these questions, not about stopping sexual assault, but about like Seattle and Portland and New York, when they are like, let's defund the police. And then it's like, oh, now you don't have police to stop you when BLM's trying to murder you or rape you or burn your house down. Like, you kind of get what you deserve, you know? But then it's like, oh, but they're Americans. Like, they're just stupid. They're indoctrinated by media and these like parasites in Washington. Like, I can't hate my own people. They're just brainwashed. So I go back and forth on this, and I feel like saying, well, that's what you deserve, Seattle. But then at the same time, I'm like, they didn't mean for this.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really the mayor's fault. So they actually did not end up defunding their department, but they treated the department so badly while all the rioting and everything else was going on. They took a loss at officers. So a lot of their qualified detectives and other people like that left. They took jobs in other cities. So now they are legitimately understaffed. Nobody wants to work there for obvious reasons, because I'm sure they know the local government will turn on them again soon.
Oh, yeah.
So
was that where Chaz was, or was that in Portland?
I think that was in Portland, where you had the Chaz Chop Zone.
Yeah, that was my favorite part of American history. Of all the BLM riots, Chaz was my favorite. I honestly wish they stayed there and they renounced their citizenship and they just lived there, because we could get all the communists and Antifa in one spot, then we could blow it up, or we could just leave them be and have them out of the country. You know, living separately with Antifa works fine for me too.
That's exactly what we should have done. We should have sent in like a SEAL team to evacuate the legitimate residents.
Right.
And then just
there's businesses being extorted and stuff.
Yeah. So we can go in, help those people, anybody that wants to leave. Then we just put a wall around it, and that's where we start dumping all the scum going forward. You just turn it into its own little separate prison colony in the middle of downtown Portland.
Now, wait, here's the thing that's interesting. If we wanted to build a wall, like let's say the federal government literally did want to just build a wall within America, they can totally do that, right? Or that require Congress? I bet the executive branch could find a way to do that.
You probably could. Like with the border, it was authorized. They played games with the financing and other stuff to prevent Trump from being able to fund it.
Right.
But I mean, why not? It was already declared an emergency when they had rioting and everything else going on there. So just under that emergency act,
I was just wondering if the federal government could just build a wall anywhere in America, why couldn't they build it on the southern border? And the obvious point is because of immigration, right? And it's like, so is immigration like a political policy or a political question, like the determining factor of whether a president's allowed to enact his own power or not? Like, that's obviously ridiculous. So I didn't know, like, I was like, wait a minute, could we have built a wall around Chaz? I bet we totally could have. No one would have complained. No one would have taken it to court. It would have got done and nothing would have happened. But then we didn't do that on the southern border. So clearly there's like a politicized aspect. I mean, everyone knows this, to the court system and to Congress and everything else, that prevented Trump from like doing what the American people voted for him to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, our government will stab us in the back any chance they get. If it's something that does benefit the people, you know, they will go the opposite route anytime there's the allowance for them to do so. And it isn't just with the border and illegal immigration, everything else. I mean, this story that here, lawmakers are investigating the Biden administration over database containing over 1 billion gun sale records. Woo. So the BATF, or as they're commonly known, or BATFE, or as they're commonly known, the ATF, it is illegal for them to keep a gun registry or database. It is also illegal for it to be made where it is searchable. Um, During a congressional hearing, they revealed they had a database and then said, oh, well, it's not searchable because the software we disabled the search function.
Wow, that's reassuring. Wait, so how do they have like 1 billion gun sales records if there hasn't been a billion sales? Has like that can't be right? Because there's like only there's 300 million guns in America. So I guess if like
there's more than that.
1 in 3 purchases go through, then that's a lot of. So they track basically every single gun purchase in the country then.
Yeah, and I think it's probably significantly more than that. The number I'd heard before was there's something like 30 guns for every U.S. citizen in the U.S.
Jeez.
So, yeah, there's literally trillions and trillions of rounds of ammunition in private hands.
Wow.
And, for the last 40 some odd months straight, there's been over 1 million gun sales every month. So, I mean, there's plenty of guns in private hands. But the way that they've done this, so when a gun store closes, or even if it's a small operation, like I used to know a guy that did receipts. Basically, he was a licensed FFL. He ran this out of his house, and if you ordered a gun from like Guns America, whoever, you could ship it to his house. You paid him $25, and then he did the transfer there. So anytime one of these little places goes out of business, closes, or relocates state to state, they have to ship the records to the ATF to hold for 10 years. They're supposed to just be stored unless there's a warrant to investigate a crime related to a gun that was sold there. Again, it's just supposed to be like to hold the records for safekeeping.
They do all this like monkeying around with like the numbers and stuff, and they do all this funny business to try to get around the fact that we shouldn't have a gun registry or that we can't have one or whatever.
Yeah.
Like whether it's with the NICS program and registering the serial numbers of your firearms and tracking where all of them are, or with the FFL, it's FFL, right? FFL dealers having to keep all the information and then send it to the ATF, who keeps it for like 10 years. And we know they probably keep the documents longer than that too, because there's always like, funny business behind the scenes that goes on. And it's especially with government like CIA, FBI, ATF, people like this. So it's like they try to just get around. It's the same with the search feature. They're like, there's no search feature. We like unchecked the box that says search feature enabled.
Yeah.
Okay, well you just turn it back on and it's there. Like, what the heck?
Yeah, exactly. And that's literally what they did. Well, they're not supposed to be scanning all these records and putting it in any kind of a database anyway. But apparently they have 1 billion of them. So, it's insane. Like the only thing so just to give you another example. So the ATF also runs the NFA program, which is for suppressors, machine guns, things like that. And if you want any of that. So that database actually still has to be stored on microfiche. Like they don't want it to be searchable or computerized in any way. And the reason our government's done this and put these weapon databases to say where it can't be electronic and why they're so adamant about it is because if you had a foreign invader come here, this would be one of the first things they would go for. Have you ever seen the original movie Red Dawn?
No.
Like 1980s one. So at the very beginning, like first 5 minutes of the film, that's why the Russians go to the gun store, get the ATF forms from there, and then they have the address of everybody that lives within this little town that owns a firearm, and those are the houses they go to first.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'd never considered that. Yeah, that's a little sketchy. Hey, that's a little concerning. My goodness. Well, I guess people should be. I don't want to give legal advice, but if it were me, I'd probably go to a gun show and buy a gun there. You still need to be qualified. It's not the gun show loophole, but if you do buy from a private seller, then you don't have to put your info. And we're just about out of time, but you can. Did you want to talk about the last story quick, or save it for
we can
next
move
show?
We'll move on to the next story. It's just more abuse from government.
All right, we'll take it away.
All right, we'll go into it real fast. So the National School Board Association had to reveal that they wrote a letter to the Merrick Garland, the federal government, the Department of Justice, asking for them to deploy the National Guard against parents that were showing up at school board meetings. They wanted our Department of Justice to go in and arrest these people, use the National Guard, the FBI, whatever resources they had to push back for these parents. And apparently they complied because we know the FBI was helping them strong arm people.
Well, wow, that's shocking. And like I said, maybe it shouldn't be because, as we discussed earlier, there has been precedent set in America that you go to schools at gunpoint and force the public to do something they don't want. Even if it was good, that's what they did in the past, and they'll do it today. And don't think the government will always do the right thing. If they have the power to go to schools at gunpoint and force you to do something you don't want, they're going to use it against you in the future. And it's not always going to be for a righteous cause. Usually, as people know, they try to frame things in a nice way, the government, so that you give them the power to do it. You know, oh, the Patriot Act, give me the power so we can get the terrorists. And then let's use all this like technology and all these like new rights that we have as the government on the American people. But you have the right yourself to check us out on punchingleft.com and subscribe to our Telegram channel, which is the best right to exercise. It goes finding us on punchingleft.com, your First Amendment, and then your Second Amendment right. Please do find us there. Subscribe to us on Telegram, where we post updates for the shows when we go live and clips as well. Thank you all very much for joining us tonight on Punching Left. Find us again on punchingleft.com. I am AJ Wilms, and thank you for joining.
I'm Mike Lauer. Thanks again, and we'll see everybody again soon.